Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Lecture Series. My name is Clay Zimmerman, Director of Science and United States Ruminant Technical Services for Biochem. Today, we welcome Dr. Andrea Lendewig from IFCN to tell us the status of the global dairy market and a gleam into what's to come 10 years from now. Andrea is Head of Research and Development at IFCN. Her team analyzes the dairy sector, its developments, and drivers to provide reliable and up-to-date data, as well as valuable insights and knowledge to help people in the dairy industry make better decisions. Andrea has a PhD from Keele University, an MS from City St. George's University of London, and a Bachelor of Applied Science from Catholic University in her native Venezuela. She worked for IFCN Dairy Research Network for more than 3.5 years. Dr. Lendewig, welcome to the Real Science Lecture Series. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Yes, we are a dairy data provider and services and consultancy services as well, but we don't work alone. We have a network of researchers, and we also have a network of companies that over 130 companies are currently in our network. And these companies are representative of the whole supply chain. So everything related to dairy. We have processors, we have you guys in nutrition and all the animal health. We have many companies that are related to the dairy sector and are representing the supply chain and are interested in all this data and knowledge and insights that we can somehow provide. And as you were saying already, we try to support in the decision-making process in the market intelligence. And what is important for us when we analyze our data is to understand what is the difference between shocks and trends, because a lot has been happening just over the past 5 years. So many events that have impacted the dairy sector. So if we go from the pandemic and all the global shutdowns and all the supply chain problems, then the war in the Ukraine that was increasing or providing very high prices for energy, fertilizers, so a lot of inflation, recession afterwards, all the policies that are being implemented, all these kind of issues that is impacting the dairy sector in a way or other. For us, it's very important to understand and to differentiate between shocks and long-term trends. Because when we say shocks, it's something that happens quite quickly. For example, can be from the economic point of view, or can be some shifts in prices that are impacting the farm input cost, or some issues with labor, or logistic issues, or there were some environmental policies that are being implemented. All these kind of uncertainties are usually shocks, are things that come and go and don't stay. If these shocks are repeating or are staying in the long term, then they become trends. Yeah, for example, environmental policies, the implementation of the policy is a shock. But after the policy has been implemented and is there to stay, it becomes a trend. And what it means is that the dairy sector needs to adapt to this trend because it will not go away. And in this case, we have, for example, changes in the cost of milk production that we have been seeing for a few years already. This implies that farmers will need to invest more on their farms, or they need to have a buffer capacity. The farm consolidation process where we are seeing less farms, but those farms are getting bigger and are more profitable. The changes on the trend consumptions, the patterns on the demand consumption, we see that the preferences of consumers have been changing, so more fatty products, and I will talk about it later during my presentation, or if there are some changes also in the milk alternatives, or even one of the things that has been impacting the dairy sector more often has been the weather anomalies and all the events, droughts and floods that impact the feed production and the milk production, and how the dairy sector has been trying to adapt to these events that we know are there and are coming from now and then. And after we have understood that, then we can better analyze our data. And what we have been seeing in 2024, we saw that the milk production was good and it was already reaching and crossing the line of the billion tons of milk. At this point, I will also to clarify and highlight that we analyze all our data is standardized. In the case of milk, we have solid corrected milk, standardized at 4% fat and 3.3% protein. And we do that because it allows us to compare data among different regions, different countries, but also over the period of time. And what we can see on the left side is our trends for milk production. And we have been seeing this steady increase in milk production, and we were happy to see in 2024 how it reached and crossed the billion ton mark. But when we started analyzing a little bit further, then we saw that since 2010 until 2020, more or less, the trend was going up at a rate of 2.7% per year. That was the increase in the milk production. However, when we see only the past 5 years, then this increase has been slowing down. Only the increase is on average about 2% per year. But what is even more concerning, and you can see the split in the colors, we have split it into delivered milk, which means is the milk that is coming into the formal markets, and also the informal milk, the one that doesn't go to the informal markets or that is being consumed on the household of the farmers or by the animals on the farm, or whichever other milks that are less relevant at world level. We see that the trends are even more dramatic. So the delivered milk used to increase by a rate of 2.1% per year, but over the past 5 years has been only 0.8%, whereas the informal milk is continuously increasing at 3.5% per year. So this means that we are not only slowing down in the increase in milk production, but also the share of the delivered milk, the milk that is going to the formal markets that we can see on the supermarkets, that is going to the export markets, is shrinking. On the demand side, what we see, and that's the graph on the right side, we see has been increasing. So every year we see a positive increase in the demand side. It's coming from two sides. It comes from the population growth, which is the light gray bar, and it's always more or less the same. It's around 1% increase per year. And what is changing is the darker part, which is coming from the per capita consumption. And this is, of course, due to different aspects or drivers that is increasing the per capita consumption faster or not. Over the past few years, we have seen that the increase is not that much, it's below the long-term average. And this has been due to different reasons. So it varies according to the countries. For example, in India, we see it has been very positive, and it's because they are having higher incomes and more people is moving to the cities. But then we have the case of Argentina, that was the opposite. They were seeing high inflation, low milk production, so meaning that less milk was available and the milk that was there was too expensive. And when milk is expensive, of course, people start buying less. So there are different drivers for supply and demand. But what is important for us is to analyze as I said, the delivered demand and where is it coming from. And in this graph, what we can see is also the changes in 2020 to 2024 coming from the major exporters and major importers. We also added here the UK. We know the UK is a net importer, not exporter, but we added there among other European countries because it's gaining a little bit of importance here in Europe at least. And what we have been seeing is that on average, it was an increase of 5 billion kg per year. Here we are excluding India and Pakistan, and the reason we are excluding India and Pakistan is because these markets are kind of self-sufficient, but they don't impact the international markets that much. They don't export or import too much, and that's why we exclude them when we want to have the global picture and what is happening on the global market. But we do see that what is important, for example, main exporters like EU are not increasing much in milk that is being delivered, that is being going into the processors. And like that, most of the main exporters, with the exception of the US, where we do see an increase. In the case of the importers, which they are also supposed to be producing more to satisfy their domestic demand, only in the case of China, we saw a little increase, but it's still not enough to satisfy their domestic demand. What we saw is that in other countries that are usually less relevant, so to say, from the perspective of the international markets, is where we saw this increase was happening. And among those countries, we found CIS countries, and especially Russia has been increasing in production and delivered milk, and also Turkey. And why it's important to analyze production? Because production is also going to be one of the drivers for prices. And this is what we see in our red line here. This is the IFCN World Milk Price Indicator. This is estimated based on the oceanian prices of the 5 main dairy commodities. And we have seen all the fluctuations, but in general, is an increasing trend. In 2024, after all what happened in the previous years, the market was recovering, the prices were going up, they even increased by 11% compared to 2023, reaching an average of $44.2 per 100 kg. This was good for the farmers. Again, in 2025, it even increased further and went above the $50. And one of the drivers for this increase in the milk price, or what we call the World Milk Price Indicator, has been the butter. So that's what you can see on the right side. On the other graph, we have the prices for 2 of the main dairy commodities. One is SMP, that is skim milk powder, and we have the butter prices, representing basically fat and protein products. And usually these commodities in the past were moving together. What we have seen since 2015, 2016, that's not the case anymore. Suddenly butter was not as bad and people started consuming more butter and the consumer preferences changed. That's what I was also saying in my previous slides, the importance between shocks and trends. And here we saw a trend. The willingness to consume more fatty products was there, became a trend. So it, of course, had an impact on the prices for butter that has been increasing quite a lot. Only in 2024, they increased by 38%. And of course, this having an impact on the milk price, but also on the behavior of certain countries. Not all countries react the same way, but some do. And what we saw here is the US was reacting to this. The US started producing more milk, started producing more content in their milk. So in natural content is not that much when we see the increase, but when we standardize it, then we see that they are increasing in milk production is because the fat and protein content were higher and higher. So they were somehow reacting to this. And this is even went to the point that they went from being net importers of butter to becoming net exporters of butter, being their main markets, Canada and Mexico. And not only that, but this excess of butter production that was going now to the international markets, of course, were having an impact on the international market prices. And this is what you can see on the right side. So usually the 3 markets, the 3 main exporters, Europe, Oceania, and US, were again moving together in their commodity prices. In the specific case of butter, then suddenly in 2024, the US prices started declining because it was an oversupply of milk. The domestic market was not consuming too much because one of the factors, not probably the only one, was also this rise of the interest for the GLP-1 drug for weight loss, which was combined with the higher consumption of protein and less fat. And then somehow it was an oversupply of butter in the US that needed to go to the external markets, to the exports. And this was, of course, impacting the prices. And then the US was the first one going down, offering better prices. But then at some point, Europe and Oceania could not keep the high prices. And now they have started also going down. And that's why in 2025, we have seen the world milk price also going down, even though on average it's still above 2024. And when we see a little bit more what is happening this year, and milk production has recovered. And where is it milk coming from? Well, basically, milk is coming from everywhere. So apart from analyzing and having and collecting annual dairy data, we also do the monitoring of the main 65 countries every month. This represents already 92% of the global milk production. And this is the main result you can see here on this map. All the green bubbles are the countries that have been increasing in milk production from January to October compared to the previous year on the same period. One of the countries that has increased the most is the US. More animals, higher milk yields, so doing great. Europe, they were having much more restrictions and they were struggling at the beginning of the year, but Q3 was we saw an important increase in the milk production. Of course, we also need to consider when we compare it to 2024 was also not the best year here in Europe. There were a lot of factors that were impacting milk production, among those weather and animal diseases as well. So a little bit of the increase that we are seeing in Q3 more specifically is also the factor of the base year. That 2024 was not the best year, of course, then when we have a better production, it looks great. Then in the case of New Zealand, they are also showing a green bubble there. They are having good prices, good weather. So milk production was also increasing and was showing there. China is the one that has been struggling. China is a very specific case, and I will show you more information about China later, but they were struggling with oversupply of milk, and then suddenly they have been declining in milk prices and also in milk production. But overall, milk has been coming from everywhere. What we also try to analyze, because we find is relevant, is going to basically the source. Apart from having annual data and having monthly data, we also have farm data. And this is where we work with our network of researchers that I was mentioning at the beginning. We have over 100 researchers from over 100 countries that supports us with the data collection at national level, but also at farm level, which are these orange countries that you are seeing here. We collect farm data from 55 countries that represent already 90% of the global milk production. And this is important because we consider that we need to analyze what is going on at farm level regarding milk production cost, regarding production system, regarding farm economics, because this gives us a better understanding on how farmers are operating, where they can improve, what can happen in the future with the farmers based on the market conditions. And then, sorry, I went there. And one example is here regarding the cost of milk production. This is one of the main indicators that we analyze. And what we have been seeing is over the past 5 years, milk production costs have increased at around 20%, or 20% higher than they used to be in the past. Of course, this puts a lot of pressure on farmers. So because even from the maps, we don't cover all the maps around the world, but all the countries around the world, but as I said already, 55, which represent most of the milk production. And from those countries, 75% already have costs that are above $40. In the past, farmers were not that much dependent on prices. Of course, good prices would make them happy. But even when prices were not as good, they were still producing because they were still having good margins and they could afford production. But since inflation had been hitting them harder over the past 5 years and farm input costs have been increasing, then this is not the case anymore. And farmers are struggling a little bit more and feeling more the pressure when milk prices are going down. And even more specifically, we can analyze what the cost components are and what are the different farms and how are the different farming systems. And in this graph on the left, you can see that we have different farms. I think you will get the slides later, so you can analyze more in detail. But basically what it represents, we collect per country at least 2 farms. It can be more, 2 typical farms. This means farms that are representative of the dairy sector in each country. In some countries, we collect even more if we have different regions. For example, in the US, there are different regions. Of course, we collect more in India as well, Germany as well. And what we have here is the first 2 letters represent the country. Then we have the size of the farm, which is around 180 cows. And then if there is any letter at the end, it represents the regions. For example, this in Germany is north of Germany. In the US is Idaho. In China is Beijing, because we collect from multiple regions. But what is interesting in this graph is to see how the costs of milk production have been changing over the past years. And we see that, for example, if we take the case of Poland, then we have here that the costs were increasing from $36 to $49. So practically the cost of this type of farms in Poland, around 70 cows, are already at the levels of other European countries in Western Europe. So they have increased quite a lot. The highest cost is usually feed, which is very much true. But here, what we have also seen is that labor is playing an important role, and also machinery has been getting more expensive. An interesting case here is China. As I was mentioning before, China is actually declining in costs, but China was already at very high costs. China was also being supported by the government regarding milk prices, so they were having usually very high milk prices. So with high cost, they were not concerning because their prices were even higher. This has changed, and over the past couple of years, the prices have been even dropping, and farmers in China has been having some pressures to produce milk. They had the oversupply of milk is not there. The interest for milk is also kind of been declining, so demand has been declining because economic issues internally. So China has been a special case. It's a case that we like to monitor quite closely because it's important from the import side. But why it's important for us to analyze farms so deeply is because it let us know which kind of farms will be there in the future, which are the farms that will be resilient, that will stay there, because with all these challenges, some farms tend to disappear. And why is it important? Because if you look at the right side, you will see the analysis at global level. So currently, by 2024, we were having around the world around 109 million of dairy farms. And these farms, we classified it. I know each country has its own standard of classifying the sizes of the farms. But of course, again, we need to standardize if we want to compare the different countries. And in IFCN, we standardize this by color. So if you see, the blue farms are usually the household farms, so farms that has less than 10 cows, and we call them household farms because mainly what they produce goes into the formal markets or even only for the household. Then we have the green farms between 10 and 100. These are family farms. These already start to be a little bit of a business. Milk also goes into processors. And then everything above 100, we consider it a business. It's a business farm. And what is relevant from here is if you see the 3 bars, the first bar is saying, from all the farms in the world, I just mentioned there are around 109 million dairy farms. Only 3% of those farms have more than 10 cows, which doesn't sound like much. But already these 3% of farms already have 33% of the animals. And not only that, they are responsible for producing almost 60% of the milk. So these are the farms that we need to look into. These are the farms that we consider are going to be there in the future, providing and supplying milk for the world. And where are those farms located? Well, the green ones, the family farms, are mainly located in Europe. And the business farms we can see very often in US, New Zealand, for example. And the blue ones are the ones that we see a lot in India, and that's why we tend to exclude India from this international analysis. Of course, they are the top one milk producing in the world, so it's not relevant. India is still very important. And also something that we always try to look at, because we consider is important for the businesses, is when strategies are being developed. It's very important to understand that strategies shall be different depending on the challenge. And there are different challenges, and our team here developed kind of a matrix of where the challenges are and how they shall somehow be approached or considered or categorized. And in the first box on the bottom left is the monitor. That means those are the things that we know. Yeah, because regarding location, we know they are there. Regarding what the issue is, we know what the issue is. It's, let's say, business as usual. But not because business is as usual, we are not going to monitor what is currently happening. So we know there is a transformation of the dairy sector. We need to track it. We know farm consolidation is happening. We need to track it. Then if we move to the right side, we have the research. That means those are things that we know issues are there, but we really don't know what the outcome will be. It means we know the increase of farm costs will be there, but will it mean that farmers will leave? Farmers will close? What does it really mean, the impact of new technologies or AI being implemented on farms? What does it mean, the deflation in China? How is it going to impact the dairy sector? Then we have the search box. That means we know the issues, but we don't know when or where they are going to happen. We know the milk price is going down recently, but what does it mean? Because there is different transition for each country. We know what is happening at world level, when is it going to impact each region, and how is it going to impact each region. The same case with the supply of fat. It was tight. Some markets were reacting, some others were not. The US was reacting and was producing more fat, but Germany was not, for example. Then the weather anomalies, we know they are there, we know what to do, but when it's going to be the next drought or flood, that we don't know with certainty, or where it's going to happen. And then we have the discovery box. The discover, it means nobody knows. Those are the black swans. Nobody is expecting them. But sometimes they happen and they will impact us definitely. There are the politics, or there are new regulations coming, or suddenly tariffs will be implemented. All these things will be happening even if we don't know. And what is important is that our businesses remain resilient and we have the strategies on how we can tackle these challenges. And for us, it's important very much to analyze a little bit the future, what we expect will happen over the next years. And in IFCN, this, if you see the red line, is the forecast we had estimated 10 years ago. Meaning in 2014, this was our forecast. We were saying by 2024, world milk production will reach 1 billion tons of milk, and this actually happened. The blue line is what was happening each year, and our forecast was very much accurate regarding milk production. It reached an accuracy of 99%. And why is that? Because we could differentiate between shocks and trends. We know what has been implemented. We understand the trends for production, trends for demand, and what policies have been there. And based on that is how our long-term outlook is being estimated. And why is this important, and for whom? Is important for pretty much everybody, for farm input companies, for processors, for retailers, for whoever wants to know what is going on in the markets and to try to prepare themselves for whatever is there in the future. Of course, this outlook is based on what we know now, and it can be changed if something dramatically changes. And if that happens, we of course adjust our outlook. But what do we see now? What do we see today will happen by 2035? Well, we expect milk production will increase by 15% because, of course, population will be increasing, and this population will be increasing in per capita demand. We estimate by 9 kg per year per person. And of course, this will imply more milk will be needed and more milk will need to be traded as well. And where is this milk coming from? Well, no, it's not coming from more cows. It's not, because most of the countries are reducing their herd sizes. It's also not coming from more farms, because we said already, farm consolidation is happening. It means less farms, but bigger farms and more efficient farms that are producing higher milk yields. So we estimate an increase of 0.6 tons of milk per year per cow. And this is where the milk is going to come from. If things remain as they are now, what we also expect is this. Basically, green bubbles are countries that will have milk surplus by 2035. Red bubbles is the opposite, are markets that will not be self-sufficient. They will not produce enough to satisfy the internal demand, and they will need to import more. And then if we go a little bit more in detail, we have Europe. For Europe, they are not growing too much in self-sufficiency as we were having before. We will see it in the next slide, because Europe as well as New Zealand are dealing more with environmental regulations and with restrictions to grow. On the other side, the US, and I will also talk a little bit more later, has an ambition to grow on exports, and actually is already doing it a little bit. In the case of Latin America, is a region that is very much mixed. It has its countries that are at surplus and countries that have some deficits. Brazil is here and there, because Brazil sometimes produces more and sometimes less. But what is interesting about this region is whatever is a surplus from Argentina or Uruguay, for example, usually stays within the region. They do export especially powders to other countries, but most of the surplus stays within the region. Then where we see the needs, where we see the milk will go to, or where countries will be needing to import more, is, well, we have South Africa or Western Africa and Eastern Africa. They are increasing fast is in population. That's where demand is coming from. And they tend to demand more powders because, of course, they're cheaper products. Then we have north part of Africa or Middle East. They are, of course, still, we expect them to be a deficit because they will be demanding more than what they are producing, but their needs are different. They are more interested in more fatty products. They are increasing more in consumption of cheese, for example. Then we have Asia, some regions in Asia, Southeast Asia and North Asia, like Japan. They are also new, so to say, new dairy markets, or relatively new. They traditionally didn't consume that much dairy, but the new generations are. The new generations are interested in consuming more, but more even premium products. Again, cheese or westernizing diets. So eating more like we eat here in the western part of the world. And they are also having more people living in the cities. They also have more tourists coming there, and they would like to offer pizzas, for example, and these kind of things. So their demand is also changing for dairy products, and it's increasing the interest. But then if all of this happens, we have still kind of a concern, because we were analyzing and going a little bit more into detail and saying, what if we follow the trends as we are seeing them now? That means allowing like a theoretical scenario, because of course it will be demanded whatever it will be produced, right? So if there is not enough production there, it means lack of availability and probably also issues with affordability, because will not be enough, but whatever is there might be more expensive. So the countries with less purchasing powers are the ones that will be harmed the most. Or exporters will decide to produce more premium products because are the more profitable ones. But if we go into a theoretical scenario where we say, okay, let's demand go and follow its own path and move as we are seeing it will, so keep growing as we have seen until now it's growing, then it will create what we see in the left chart. This red part, the red part on the chart shows what we call the unsatisfied demand, meaning that if milk would be there, it would also be consumed. And this would create a deficit of around 20 million tons of milk by 2035, meaning that, again, we will have lack of milk, we will have affordability issues and availability issues if the trend continues as they are. And why do we say that? Well, basically, when we look at this graph, is telling us a lot. In this graph, you can see we have red bubbles and we have green bubbles. In the red bubbles are the countries that are deficit countries and will be deficit countries still by 2035, meaning that they will need to import to satisfy the internal demands. And then we have the green bubbles, or the green circles, are the surplus countries, countries that produce more than whatever they need. And of course, they will be exporting that excess. But what is concerning is, if we look on the x-axis, is the rate at which they are increasing in production. If we look at the y-axis, we see the level of self-sufficiency. And we see that only Oceania, Europe, US, some Latin America countries, some CIS countries are the ones that are above that line. That means that produce enough, or even more, will produce enough, or even a little bit more than enough to satisfy their internal demand. The rest of the countries will still be depending on the imports. But what is even more concerning than that is when you look at the rate of production, the ones that are increasing faster in production, or even having a positive increase in productions, as the ones that are still not self-sufficient. And Europe and Oceania are actually declining in production. That means they will still be self-sufficient, so they will still be self-sufficient and will still be able to satisfy their domestic demand, but they will not have much left to export to the other regions that will need it. And those are the ones that probably will decide what to produce and what not to produce, based on the needs of the market, but also who is willing to pay more. In the case of the US, it's the exception, because we also have Argentina and Uruguay here being green, but again, usually they tend to stay within the region and are not huge exporters. US is the one that is like the promising one, being like the one that is increasing in production, increasing in self-sufficiency, and therefore will produce more, and I will explain it later. But it's concerning because China, where is it going to get the milk from, or Africa even more, because they also don't have the highest purchasing power. Here, this is the picture that we estimate for the US. If things remain the way they are now and what we are seeing now, and even we saw a little bit of this already in 2025, is that the US is expected to increase its exports and grow its exports by 8.6 million tons ME and contribute this to the global market. This means that if this happens, they will be increasing in production, or not in production, but in net dairy surplus, so net exports by 8.7% each year. And where is this increase going to come from? In the past, the increase was coming mainly from the milk yield. So we're increasing the yield per cow every year, and we're very efficient by doing that and not really increasing in the herd sizes. However, of course, animals have their levels, and whenever they reach the full capacity, they will not be able to increase much more in the milk yield. And that's why we expect is that it will be an increase in the number of animals. And actually, we have been seeing that this year already. So remember that this is the outlook we did last year. So based on the data from 2024, we will be doing the new outlook next year, and we will release it in March with the 2025 data. But this is what we saw at the time for the US, and we have seen it in 2025 already, the increase in the herd size, also in the milk yield, but supported by more animals. That's how the milk production in the US is moving forward. But in order to also be able to supply more to the external markets, so the international markets, it also needs to come from the demand side. And usually the demand was coming from more population and more per capita demand. Now what we expect that the increase from the population will still be there. Population will still increase. That means more people will need the milk. But we expect that per capita consumption will either remain as it is or will even decline a little bit, because it's already at very high levels. So again, even if people have higher purchasing powers, it gets a point that you say, I cannot drink more milk than what I'm already drinking. In the case of Europe, the picture is a little bit different. In Europe, we have all these policies and regulations and restrictions regarding sustainability that are acting like a new quota or a new cap that puts pressure on the farmers and how milk is going to be produced. And that's why we are having a different outlook. And what we see is that for EU 15, it will be a decrease in milk production of 11.5 million tons of solid corrected milk until 2035. EU 13, on the other side, is actually increasing in milk production, and we expect it will keep increasing, but they are also not the main producers, and their increase of 1.6 million tons will not be enough to compensate from the losses from the EU 15. Where is this decline coming from is because the losses in the animals. We expect that we will be losing around 1.6% per year on average until 2035 of the animals that are there. And the milk yield will increase because farmers get more efficient, but that increase will not be enough to compensate again for the losses. And that increase will happen mainly is in Eastern Europe, because Western Europe is already very much efficient, and the milk yields are very much high in many countries, even reaching the 30 tons per year per animal, which is also quite a lot. And all these constraints to grow the farms, to have more animals, on top of that is the lack of succession. So there are issues with labor, and new generations taking over the farms is what is limiting, or what we see might limit the increase in the milk production here in Europe. And the question that we even raise is if European farmers can make farms attractive or have even farm incomes that will be attractive enough for new generations to take over. And since we are getting like a lot of questions from different companies in the dairy sector, we also not only provide data, but we also work very often in projects. So over the past 12 months, we have already developed more than 30 projects with different companies and organizations that are related or interested in the dairy sector. And of course, they have multiple questions, and every question is different, but they are very much, the concerns are similar. So it's about the future milk bulk analysis. So is milk going to be there? Where is going to be the milk? Who are the farmers I need to work with? Or even analyzing the whole supply chain going from the dairy farming to the dairy sector, and how a dairy sector can be developed within a country, even working on roadmaps for the dairy sector on specific countries, all the aspects of sustainability, very much important in Europe, but also other international companies where they have their interest in reaching certain emissions or goals for emissions, but also social aspects. And then we have even the impact analysis, where are new technologies or new developments or new ways of managing the farms, or new products that can be introduced at farm level, and how it can be profitable for the farmer or good for the environment, or can increase production. What is the positive impact of these new technologies or inventions on farm level? And like that, we have been working a lot with all our network to try to improve things in the dairy sector, because at the end, that's our goal, and that's what is important for us as well. And with that, I have finished my presentation. I hope within the time that was already given to me for this. I don't know if there are any questions.
Yes, thank you, Andrea, for an excellent presentation. Before we get started with the Q&A portion, we'd like to share a brief video, and then we'll be right back to answer the questions submitted during today's presentation.
Balchem has invested decades perfecting the art of nutrient encapsulation. And now, new AminoShure XL is setting a new standard, delivering 35% more metabolizable lysine than leading competitors. With AminoShure XL, you can provide your cows with a more consistent and higher quality source of metabolizable lysine, leading to improved and more dependable results. A recent meta-analysis found that feeding rumen-protected lysine led to an increase in milk fat percentage and 4.4 more pounds of energy-corrected milk. Feed new AminoShure XL to your cows and have confidence that you're using the most consistent, reliable, and cost-effective source of lysine on the market today. Learn more at balchem.com/XL.
As a reminder, you can still submit questions to the Q&A tab at the top of your screen. Dr. Lendewig, our first question is, on a global basis, what are the trends for percent fat and percent protein in cow's milk?
What we standardize, because of course each farm has its own fat and protein content, but we standardize it at 4% fat and 3.3% protein, because it's more or less what we see the most is normal standardization of the milk.
Okay, based on your figures, feed costs appear to be a consistent driver of greater cost to produce milk on a global basis. Was there a single major driver of greater feed costs? Is it a specific commodity?
A specific commodity in which sense?
Is there one specific ingredient that's driving feed costs, or is it just?
No, feed in general, because, I mean, let me even go back. Wait, and then we can see. No, feed in general is expensive, because if it's not feed, it's fertilizers, which is part of the feed. Okay, or may I share? Do I need to share again? Probably need to share again, right?
Yeah, there. Yep, I can see it.
Because I think it's. You can see the slide, or okay, perfect. you can see it. Because here you see, of course, feed is the big portion, but also it differentiates between, if you go to New Zealand where there is a grazing system, of course, the cost is lower, but even though it's still an important component. If you go, because they need to grow also the feed, and they need to have good pastures. And if even, for example, in Ireland, they also have seasons where they need to put the cows inside and they need to provide also some concentrates. So even though feed can be produced on the farm, or feed is grazing system, it can be less or more, but it still is an important share of the cost. Of course, if you look at China, is more than half of the cost, because they have intensive systems, and they have high feed usage on the farms for the cows. But of course, it's very much farm dependent, even country dependent, because more or less the systems within a country can be similar. But one component, no, we tracked corn and soybean, because are the ones we consider the most important, the most relevant, the mostly used. But we are also fully aware that are not the only ones.
Okay, thank you.
When we analyze typical farms, we definitely go into each farming and which are the feed components they are having for each farm. So when you see here these bars that I'm showing now, is taking into consideration the specific feed they are using for the farms. When we look at a more national and global level, we focus on corn and soybean.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this question comes from Dieter. It's an open question from a Belgian vet. If you were a politician in Europe, how would you help the industry move forward?
Oh, really? Oh my God. I will start by listening to people. I'm allowed to say that. I don't know. I'm being recorded here. Sorry. But I think, because of course, being a politician is not an easy job, and they do need to make decisions for a lot of people. And in Europe, it's even more complicated, because you don't do it for even one country, but for a whole region. But sometimes I feel that policies are being implemented without listening to the people, and without really considering the consequences of those policies. And I think these, especially the policies that are so much related to agriculture, needs to be considered a little bit further, what the implications could be. Because if we go from a global perspective, okay, I can understand emissions needs to be reduced, but Europe is very much efficient in milk production. If it's not produced here, where are you going to move to other regions that are even less efficient in emissions? That is already happening, because you see Pakistan are increasing like crazy in the number of cows, but the emissions are gonna increase even crazier. And for the planet, we are not doing anything better. Probably for Europe, yes, but not for the planet. So in my opinion, I think policies need to be a little bit better thought sometimes before implementing them.
Okay, thank you. This question is from Jerome. Based on your milk production forecast, does it take into account what percentage of reproduction success there is in the cows? Are your assumptions for reproduction that it's stable, increasing, or decreasing in reproductive efficiency?
For the outlook, of course, we don't go that much into detail. We'll go into broad indicators. First, we see how herd sizes have been increasing in the country. As such, we don't do the analysis per farm. We do it for the whole nation. And we see how practices have been implemented, what has been successful, what has been there for a while already, and where there are limitations to increase, for example, in the number of cows per farm. These are the indicators we are looking into when we do the outlook per country. But yes, of course, reproduction you can see, but we don't go that much into detail how successful they have been on farm. Not really. We look at the big picture and the trend in the country.
Okay, thank you. This question is coming in from Amy Beth. with the pressures on sustainability and emissions targets, do you see an increase in the use of technology or nutritional products that would help to reduce cow emissions, or more technology being used for things like biodigesters?
Well, that's a very specific question. My knowledge on nutrition is not as deep as yours. Again, going probably a little bit less deep, I would say yes, there are some interest in, of course, especially in regions that needs to become more efficient, to invest more in technology. Probably the US is one of those, because you also have bigger farms. Of course, you need to trust a lot in technology, otherwise you will need a lot of labor that is not always there or not always skilled for it. But in Europe, what we there are like different tendencies, and in Latin America, we have seen that certain technology is not being implemented because even if the farmer has the purchasing power to buy the equipment or whatever it is to do the investment, there is not always this skilled labor afterwards to do the maintenance, to operate the machinery and whatever. So those are things that we have been seeing, for example, in Latin America. In Europe is another case. In Europe, there has been, and I'm taking here out a little bit the UK because the UK has been having another approach. But in Western Europe, there is a lot of uncertainty going on. And farmers, even though they do have the money to invest, sometimes they don't do it because they are scared of what is going to happen and they don't know what to invest in. Or they say, okay, I need to reach certain targets for, I don't know, comply with the new regulations, but is my investment worth? So I will invest because I need to comply with it, but probably I might not get the returns out of it. So sometimes what they are deciding is closing. So there is not that straightforward answer for it. Actually, that kind of questions we tackle it is with projects. We are actually one running right now in order to go deeper into detail, because we have the overall perspective, what we know is going on and what we have heard from farmers directly. But to go into detail and know which markets are increasing in technologies and which kind of technology they are implementing on farm. For that, we are doing research projects to go more into detail.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of similar questions that have come in. So the next question is, your presentation didn't touch on the culling of cows. What are the trends there? Are producers keeping their cows longer now, especially when considering the dairy on beef trend in some markets?
Yeah, not because I didn't show it, we don't have it, we do have it. Actually, the most recent story that we have is actually here in Europe, and was one of the reasons why we saw the increase in milk production in Q3. It's because cows were kept longer. So if they kept the cows longer, of course, there was immediately more production. We do have the data regarding culling cows.
Okay, thank you. What do you foresee as the next big dairy product or dairy products on the horizon? Are there advances in yogurt, whey, etc., that are on the horizon?
There are certain tendencies of new protein products. But what we haven't seen is more than creating new products, is changes in the, because of course you cannot decide I'm producing today this and tomorrow I will produce this other product, because of course at the factory level a lot of investment is needed, so always the change is not as easy. But what we have seen, and actually the US, they were opening more cheese factories. And what we have saw also in New Zealand, they were producing more cheese, because it's of course again a more expensive product and they can sell it more or at better prices. So and the demand was there. So whatever is going to be produced is whatever the consumers are going to demand. So what we are seeing, the more interest for fatty products until now But protein products are also coming, but not in the way we used to see them, like the normal cheap powders, but more proteins because of special diets of people. Again, expensive protein products is what we also have been seeing.
Okay, thank you. This next question maybe ties into that a little bit. Do countries that are trying to increase their net export of dairy products have sufficient milk processor capacity today to meet those goals or demand projections?
You mean in the US?
Well, the U.S. or New Zealand, yeah, the ones that you're projecting as the big exporters, yeah. Do they currently have the processing capacity?
I think at the moment, yes, they do. Of course, I don't have the exact numbers of capacity right now, but I think that yes, that's something they will definitely adapt to. I mean, private companies work easy. If the demand is there, they will find a way, and that's what we have seen. Milk finds its way, and processors will also do.
Okay, thank you. One final question here. Do we know how the milk alternative options like almond milk or oat milk, some of those options, how will they affect dairy consumption in the future?
Not much. Not much already until now. As you saw it in my presentation, is one of the trends we have analyzed. Is there, definitely is there. And there's people that like their vegan options or non-dairy products, but not enough to change the patterns of consumptions for dairy. For that, actually, my team was doing a research and analysis this year. And actually, the interest of vegan products have been declining, whereas the interest for dairy has been in a steady increasing trend since forever. And I don't know if you know, but here in Europe, and probably the ones that are watching from Europe already know, here is not allowed anymore to call dairy or milk or anything that is non-dairy. And even for beef products are also, those words are not being permitted anymore in products that don't really contain dairy or beef or meats. So that's already changing in the name of the products.
Okay.
So yes, I mean there is of course certain preferences. I think it's more here in Europe, probably a little bit in the US as well, but it's not everywhere. It's very much focused and is not changing or impacting the trends for dairy.
So maybe you mentioned this a couple of times in your presentation. The GLP-1 drugs, what impact are they having, or how do you see that impacting dairy consumption in the future?
It's quite new. And we of course cannot see exactly what it's gonna. For now, it's more like a shock. Because until it's not there for longer, it's difficult to know. But even in this small period of time, we see that there is already an impact in milk production and more protein products and processors and creating new protein products for this kind of diets as well.
Yeah. All right.
So there is already a reaction to it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have additional questions, please submit them to anh.marketing@balchem.com. The Real Science Lecture Series continues with educational topics each month, including our next few. On January 6th, we'll welcome Dr. Mary Beth Hall from The Cows Are Always Right to share manure evaluation, figuring out what's going on between cows and their rations. And on February 17th, we'll be back with Walt Cooley on the Real Producer Exchange as we take a deep dive into Skylar Gerke's farming operation. Visit www.balchem.com/realscience for details on future webinars and to register for upcoming events. Balchem's podcast series continues to offer a deeper dive into our webinar topics. Log on to your favorite podcast platform and search for Real Science Exchange, or visit balchem.com/podcast. If you want a cool Real Science Exchange t-shirt, just subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address to anh.marketing@balchem.com, and we'll get that off to you. On behalf of Balchem and Dr. Lendewig, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.